Welcome to the Peace Country Historical Society podcast, where we blend community voices with historical expertise and talk about history in the Peace Country. From early settlers to modern trailblazers, we explore how history shapes our lives today. Subscribe to the Peace Country Historical Society podcast, where the past speaks and we listen.
The occasion for this taping is the transition Grande Prairie is undergoing right now as the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Detachment, who has served here for decades, is relinquishing control of Grande Prairie to Grande Prairie's own municipal police force, a new development. The force has been organizing for 2 years, and there's a gradual transition now where the RCMP will withdraw from Grande Prairie and the municipal force will take their place. So at this point, the History Society and I discussed if this wasn't an appropriate time to create a kind of tribute to the community building, the positive integration of the community that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police has facilitated and led the way in many ways over the many years that the force has been here. And so we've invited in today two members of the force who have roots, now deep roots in Grande Prairie, to talk about that community engagement, community building, the forming of positive relationships between the members of the force and Grande Prairie, often with the youth, but often with the adults, and often as the youth grow up, establishing a groove of responsibility and service, which they can look up to and depend on, as we all do in this community. So today I've invited two members of the force. To my left is Scott Haggerty, 20 years service, 12 years actively in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police until forced to leave because of a medical discharge, but continuing on in the community, working in enforcement or in service, and also importantly to a lot of the youth in this town, serving as a commander of the Army Cadet Detachment for over 20 years. In fact, he's been here from the days when you couldn't even be an official armed forces officer and a Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman at the same time, but since then continuing in both, and is now a Canadian Armed Forces officer as well as ex-policeman. His service is varied and rich, and he's well known in the community. He's married and continues to serve in many capacities in town. On my right is Brad Marcoux. Brad Marcoux is a former Army cadet who Scott Haggerty had allegedly and admittedly a great deal of influence on, and who has followed Scott into the force himself. You're a corporal now?
Yes.
Yes. Well, we all know that all organizations depend on their corporals and their sergeants, so congratulations. Yes. Welcome to the responsibility.
The constable's still the hardest working.
No kidding. 12 years service in the force. He began as an Army cadet under Scott's command and leadership. He's married and father of two. So Brad, I'm glad to have you here today, and we'll settle down and talk a bit about how when you see a mounted policeman in this town, you don't have to be afraid. Well, first of all, I want to thank you folks for coming today to talk about the unique role that the mounted police have played in the community and often missed or hidden behind the red surge and always getting your man and the mythology of enforcement, which is often what people think of. And often for many people, their encounter with the mounted police in Grande Prairie is flashing lights behind them, and then what did I do or not do? But one of the things that is important for us to remember, especially as we come to the end of the season when the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are the force at hand in Grande Prairie, is the community building aspect. That many people forget that with the mounted police in town, their faces, if not their uniforms, are often found with the hockey dads, and also in their duties. There's other things going on which help them build the community and make it safer. So today we wanted to take a focus for the History Society on the community structuring, the way in which you build up people, especially young people, in your work. And that's why I wanted to bring up the idea of, first of all, crime prevention, but also something that you talked about, Scott, the idea of competencies. What does that really mean? That you have to acquire competencies as a mounted policeman?
So as part of the promotional process in the mounted police, you have to prove that you meet certain competencies, and each position has different competencies. Some are, competencies in writing search warrants, some are competencies in computer skills, others are competencies in community. So how did you engage your community? And those are like when I applied for crime prevention unit, I had to kind of demonstrate that I had some connection with my community and I had gone kind of above and beyond what my normal role in enforcement was to develop that connection with my community. And so that's one of the competencies that I had to show.
Now, was this actually something that you were told to do and someone would watch you do it and mark you on it? Or how did that work?
So you fill out your competency, so you give an example. So an example, or the competency might be, give an example of a community building. So then you write up what you did. That goes in with your promotional package, and then it gets reviewed by peer experts.
Okay.
Who then determine if you meet, bare bones meet that competency, if you don't meet that competency, or if you exceed that competency.
Okay.
So it's on I believe, scale of 1 to 5 still, Brad?
Yep.
So 1 means you totally bombed it and nowhere close. 5 means you far exceeded what they were looking for.
Right. What you're doing then is you're trying to create a profile in the community that you're not just the man, you're someone they can know by their first name and someone they can come up to and say hi on the street or meet them on the hockey rink or in some way. And it sounds like it's mostly with young people that you're working with?
Yes and no. I mean, I sat on various community boards, and through those interactions with, the common people of Grande Prairie, they get to see you in a different light. You're not necessarily, doing the enforcement side. Through those connections, you develop a rapport. They learn more about you. They learn your interests and, your feelings of the community. So it can be adults. My focus was always more towards the youth side.
And what about you, Brad? When you came here, what were you doing in community, or what are you doing?
Well, prior to coming here, when I was in Fort McMurray, I was volunteering with cadets as well.
Right.
Volunteered with search and rescue up there. So it's all ages in search and rescue. You go from the younger guys up to the retirees that now have free time and stuff like that. So you get pretty involved in the community when you start going to all the events like the bingos and the casinos and stuff like that.
Okay.
And then got to Grande Prairie, and the volunteering kind of died down a little bit with the arrival of my own children, which now that volunteering is going to start again with them getting into school age and sports and stuff like that.
So will you volunteer with the clubs or the sport groups or the units? They
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If the kids are in it, you gotta
They're going to
put
know
the time
that
in.
Dad is there, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's interesting. There are people who are embarrassed by having their dad, behind the bench or in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Good for you. Are they athletic?
Well, they're 3 and 5, so they're running around quite a bit.
Right. So you're going to teach them to skate, and then they'll play
Yeah.
hockey, right? Yeah. That was our family tradition. Dad was not involved in any of the forces, but he was a veterans kid, and everybody knew that we were going to play hockey because he did, and his grandfather did, and everything else. So let's take an example, right? You're making on the board of Kev's Kids. If you're on a board, you're always fundraising. So you're right. There's all kinds of ways because most NGOs or non-profits have to raise money somewhere. What were the kinds of things that you focused on as that part of being a committee person?
I mainly sat on 2 boards. So PACE was, I sat on PACE for many years. And that was came out of my role in crime prevention, community policing. They wanted to have a member on the board. It was a really beneficial thing because we were just starting the Caribou Center then. So they had a lot of insight and they had that direct connection to the detachment. So it worked out really well. Kev's Kids, Daryl Major back, I think in 2005, asked me to come and join Kev's Kids. We were doing the support the troops.
Yep.
The guys were in Afghanistan then. we did a big supporting the troops thing, and after that, they asked me to come join Kev's Kids, and that's great. I mean, there's multiple people from all over the community on that. Some are very prominent members of the community, business owners, and some are just regular people, and so and you do get to meet a lot of people through the events.
Yeah.
We don't have to fundraise per se; it's all donation based, but we'll go to some events. So you get to meet more and more people, and it worked out really well, like sitting on the committees. And
So it means that you're well known outside of the times you're wearing your uniform and in your vehicle.
Yeah.
And
well, that being the media officer,
Yeah.
I was on TV all the
Okay,
time. So,
right. Right.
yeah, everybody knew me. According to my wife, everybody knows me, which may or may not be a good
Yeah,
thing.
You became the face of the force. Yes.
Well, we had CTV right in town.
Right.
So
Those days.
Sarah and I would see each other pretty well every day for
Right.
about 3 years.
So it means you really have to behave yourself now because you're a known.
Yeah, it kind of sucks.
Yeah, and you're new enough to be able to avoid that.
Yeah, not enough people know me, although being born and raised here, they kind of know me anyway.
Your turn will come. Your turn will come.
Yeah.
So you guys become functionally kind of an anchor on a committee or a board because you're the people that the rest of the committee can count on to show up, keep up with things, be the dependable people that can be called on or delegated something and it'll get done.
Yeah, it's kind of in our nature, I think.
Yeah, we'll always answer the
Task-orientated.
phone and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, when I hear there's a mounted policeman on board, I know that's one person that I can call and the job will get done, you know?
yeah,
And that goes back partly to your philosophy, your roots in the community, but also your representation as community builders. You know, the idea is you're the go-to people for some of these things so they don't fall down out of neglect. What about crime prevention? What does that amount to? What does that mean? When did it start here?
The Crime Prevention Unit started in 2008, 7, somewhere in there. Karen Garapi was hired to start up crime prevention. There was a lot of concern in the community about the level of crime and that wasn't being, or the root causes of crime weren't being addressed. So Karen was hired by the city and we were partners. And it just started off, the two of us, and then it grew into a very viable unit. She came up with some amazing strategies. She was an incredible woman to work with, like just brilliant. I think in 2009, somewhere in there, I actually submitted her name to the Solicitor General's office, and she actually got this very distinctive award. And we had to go down to Edmonton, and the Premier and the ministers and Lieutenant Governor were all there, and she got this award, and very well-deserved award. But it was just kind of seeing what was happening in the community that wasn't being addressed. So some of it was something as simple as our new people, immigrants coming
new Canadians,
to Canada and not understanding some of the things about Canada. So, she used to call them conversation cafes,
Okay.
where we would get together and we just, in a very low-key thing, I wouldn't wear my uniform. And it was just answering their questions, because in a lot of times they came from countries where the police were oppressive and agents of the state, and they were terrified of the police. Another example is during that time there was a lot of the drug concerns going on in town, and we started doing presentations for a lot of the big companies. And
okay.
so, because a lot of them just didn't understand, like, what was the drug issue in Grande Prairie, and what were the drugs, and what were the effects of some of those drugs. And I used to always say, I'll come to your company, but I want your spouses there too.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the example I always used to give is, and they'd say, well, why do we need that? And I'd say, okay, you have a truck driver coming down Wapiti Hill. He's hauling a B train full of some caustic material. And he's not paying attention because he's worried about his 14-year-old daughter who's entering the sex trade to pay for her drug addiction. And he misses the corner and he dumps tens of thousands of liters of some highly poisonous thing in the Wapiti River right upstream from the water treatment plant. Their safety people would always look and go, Okay.
Yeah, now we understand.
Good point. Now I get
Yeah,
it.
distraction, no kidding.
So I think we did
Yeah.
hundreds, like 200 plus presentations a year to companies. Like we were on a waiting list for them, because then they're like, oh, we can educate our staff and our people, because it's a lot of it's just not common knowledge.
So there must have been some overlap with what we used to call ADAC, or the Drug and Alcohol Commission, and now it'd be Health Services.
Yeah.
I heard about a camp that you guys had. Camp Little Buffalo?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, you kind of had that up for quite a while. You want to take the
So many years ago, probably back in 2000, late 1999, 2000, somewhere in there, before I got to Grand Prairie, they kind of came up with this idea of, it was the RCMP, Catholic Family Services, PACE, ADAC, came up with this idea of identifying through the school system kids who are at risk of entering the criminal justice system. So whether that was they had older siblings that were criminally involved or just through their home life. So these requests would go out to the schools saying, identify kids that you think are at risk. The teachers and the principals and everybody would send, some schools would send a few, some would send none. We do some interviews, and then we select these kids to come to a camp. And we used to have it out at Red Willow, Monday to Friday. So Monday morning, they'd all assemble, go out to Red Willow. And it was just a fun, safe environment. So Jackie from PACE, who is the most phenomenal cook, would cook these fantastic meals. The RCMP officers would be mentors. So each mentor would get a group of 6 or 7 or 8 youth. There'd be a camp director. So many years I mentored, then I was a director for many years. The other agencies would help out. And again, that team building. So then we got technical search and rescue involved. And then through a file I had worked with the paleontology guys and the Royal Tyrrell, we got the paleontologists involved. And then they took the kids up to the bone bed. But it was just the idea of giving them a fun, safe week where they could just have a lot of fun, have a lot of food, meet some new friends, and basically learn that the RCMP officers, whether male or female, were just normal people. We had some phenomenal times, like tubing down the Red Willow River, playing baseball out at Saskatoon Island, going up to the bone bed with one of the top paleontologists of Alberta. It was just a lot of just fun, different things that we did. And we'd have presentations on bullying and stuff like that.
So there was an educational component for them as well, life skills.
Yeah. TSR, Technical Search and Rescue, would do the hug a tree. So if you get lost in the bush, hug a tree.
Yeah, right.
So it was just a lot of really positive. It was tiring as a mentor and director to do it, but it was a lot of fun. And
So how much did you sleep at night?
not a lot.
No, I was going to say,
No, not a lot.
any camp situation,
yeah.
But some of the memories I have from that, like I remember one little guy woke up and he's like, "Oh, I had the best sleep ever." I'm thinking, we're sleeping on plywood bunk beds with tiny little foamies. I'm like, really? And he's like, well, I don't have a bed at home. I sleep on a couch.
Mm-hmm.
And then another young guy, he had never had turkey. Never once in his life had had a turkey. And he just kept going back for more. And the rule was you could always come back for seconds, thirds, fourths, as long as you finish it. Don't waste it. And a lot of those kids, would gain 4 or 5 pounds during the week because, they may, through their home life, may have not had the opportunity to have food every day or a wholesome, meal. And
So would you see these students, kids, out of context at some point on the street or in town, and they would know you and be friendly?
I have had many people come up over the years and say, "Hey, Constable Haggerty," and because they're grown up.
Yes.
I saw them when they were 12, and now they're in their 20s.
What was your name again? Yeah.
And they're like, I'm like, "Oh boy, hope I didn't give you a ticket." And they're like, "Oh, you were my mentor at Camp Little Buffalo, and I had such a fun time. And now, I'm married now, and I went to school, I finished school, and I got into trades, or I do this, or there was never kind of a real official measurement of how successful the
Okay, I
camp
wondered
was.
about that, yeah, yeah.
We never followed stats or anything like that, because once the youth left, they went on their way, and through the school resource officers and that, we'd hear if someone really got into trouble, we'd know, but you wonder, how did, I think back at some of the young kids that I dealt with, and how did they make out? And I told you before, I had one little guy who very shy. He was little short guy, very shy for the first few days and everything. And he was in my group, and then he came out of his shell, and we had a lot of fun that week. And the next year, when I was wounded in the line of duty, I was up at the hospital, and
Oh, yeah.
it was late at night, and my wife was still there, and I had just come up from, I don't know, a CAT scan or somewhere, and they had me really, really doped up, and the nurse came in and said, "There's another visitor," and my wife's like, "Oh, he's done. Like, just he needs to rest," and she's like, "No, it's a little guy, and he is really upset." So
Right.
Patty went out and came back in, and it was my little guy from the year before.
Right.
And I had been on the news. It got out on the news that night, and it was all over. And his mother had said to my wife that he had saw it on the news, and he wouldn't go to bed. He was so upset. And she brought him up to the hospital, and he hopped up in the bed, and he's like, "I just had to make sure you were okay."
Okay.
And he had made this little card and everything. And, he just sat on the bed with me, and he just, to me, that just proved that the program worked.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it was such an amazing experience. And
Capacity for attachment and goodwill.
yeah, and who knows? I never saw that little guy after that. I truly hope that he's had a successful life and he's doing well. And it's the program definitely worked.
See, I know when I was growing up, the advice was, if you ever get lost or if you get in trouble, Ottawa was our nearest city, find a policeman.
Yeah.
And get help. And then I went to other towns, and in the mean streets of those places, a lot of the folks would say, "No, you don't go to a policeman, you just get in trouble." And so their culture was very much to avoid the police. It often neighborhood to neighborhood, it varied much in the youth culture what was going on. But it is Grande Prairie. I've heard that Grande Prairie was a training kind of posting. New people would come up here and they'd learn a lot of their street work, people work up here, and then they would be gone again, sometimes in less than 2 years, as they were considered
No,
trained enough.
not for the most part. Grand Prairie is just one of those places. It's a bigger detachment, similar to what Fort McMurray, Red Deer kind of thing
Right.
is. In terms of RCMP, those are the bigger centers that we tend to police. Anything bigger than that tends to be a municipal force. The bigger the detachment, the more pull on recruits from depot that it has,
Okay,
because there's always
right.
going to be that cycle out of members transferring somewhere else and people going into retirement or elsewhere. But yeah, we did have a lot of new recruits coming in. Most of them end up staying their full 5 years, which
Right,
is
okay.
the typical station for any member in Grande Prairie
Right,
or the bigger centers. The smaller communities, the isolated posts, 2 to 3 years kind of thing.
Okay,
But
right.
unless they get into a unit or apply for a promotion or something like that, some sort of compassionate transfer, usually it's going to be a 5-year post.
So you were an Army cadet when you were in Grande Prairie. Did you know immediately that there were policemen amongst you and that you had a policeman leading your unit?
No, I didn't.
That's fascinating.
I was, for the most part, too distracted by all the other youth that were around me as well. But Scott was my captain in cadets,
wow.
and he was always wearing the Army cadet uniform, the cad pad or the dress uniform. And,
Right.
so I never really knew until later on, obviously, a couple of years later, that he was RCMP, because he'd show up sometimes in uniform, but and it didn't seem to really affect my perception of what he does.
Right.
Right? Knowing he does the profession that he does and then comes out and does on his own time, cadets, kind of helped nudge me in the direction of a career in service as well. I kind of was leaning on Army or policing, and policing was a big one. Scott was a big role model in terms of getting into policing for sure. Having him do recruiting before too didn't hurt. So,
Right, yeah.
but I saw the career that he had and the career that I could have doing that, and it was definitely something I wanted to do.
So you come out of Depot in Regina, and you go right to Fort Mac?
Yeah, right to Fort McMurray, which prior to getting there, I never knew anything about Fort Mac other than the stories.
Yes, of course.
Those are never good, right? From somebody looking from the outside in, Fort McMurray is a place you don't want to go. But I got up there and I loved it.
Yeah.
Within the first couple months of me being up there, I started volunteering with the cadets up there.
Okay.
Got into search and rescue because I got so much out of cadets myself that I wanted to kind of give back to cadets up there. Obviously, is the only place I could do it. So started volunteering with them, going to their range days, their regular cadet nights, and doing instruction and stuff like that. Search and rescue is where I really dove into the volunteering and stuff like that. I got on their board, and
Okay, right, yes.
it's- I took a really big interest in that. And it kind of allowed me to get a whole bunch of specialty courses through the RCMP as
Right.
well, because I was doing that volunteer opportunity, and made me a bit of an asset up in Fort McMurray for search and rescue management. So the relationship between search and rescue and RCMP was
Yeah.
strengthened quite a bit, because prior to that, there really wasn't much of a push to use search and rescue up there, because
Well, in the old days, I mean, I'm thinking about when they were called the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, came to our region here. The first role was largely on reporting on Indigenous people. The next role became dealing with prohibition and
Yeah.
the liquor trade,
Yeah.
and the problems with homemade booze and lethal levels of homemade alcohol. And then when the settlers came, the routine became a little more oriented on patrolling, to make sure everybody's okay, including delivering the mail. The RCMP came and fixed my appliances, But there was that real community building in that infrastructure days. And then with the railway and with eventually the coming of the car, the outreach, but also still as essential, the person in the community who you could go to in an emergency, or and with telephones it got even easier, But this idea that the community resource person that could do something for you, it was either the fire chief or the policeman, right?
Yeah.
And they remain the kind of go-to people for. So you need to have a lot of skills, because you can be anything from. You ever have to deliver a baby?
Yes.
Amen, you did. Wow. You have done it all, Scott. Your turn will come, I'm sure. But I mean.
You don't want that, trust me.
No, it's an adventure.
That's an unnerving thing.
It's an adventure. But here again, who are the go-to people in a crisis? Right a bit. Now, when you were a cadet, did you think of the police as, you said you eventually moved into the Royal Canadian Mounted Police by then. But at what point, what made the click in your head that that's what you wanted to do?
Well, a big part of it was I wanted that career in service, and policing is the one career that I could do that service in the communities that I know. Joining the military and stuff like that, I'd be shipped off
Going away all the time.
God knows where, right?
Yeah.
But policing, I feel like I could have made more of an impact doing that rather than going into the Army myself, but not that Army's a bad decision. Yeah, I think policing, the biggest thing for policing was, obviously I had Scott as
When did you tell him? Or did you tell him?
I think you knew pretty early on, hey? I think as I was getting out of cadets, we had that chat of what I wanted to do, and I talked about wanting to get into policing. Obviously, I wanted to wait a little while, get some life experience, and I think that was actually on your recommendation too, to get out there, get a job, and do some stuff first, and then apply. And I did that, and still takes a while to get in, about a year and a half in the process to finally get the call and go. But yeah, I just wanted to do what he did.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
So it's true that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are all picked people. They're a group that are chosen to be outstanding, to be elite status. Do they look at your background when you're applying for people with cadet experience or things like that?
Well, everything about your background is looked at, really. What did you do before? Who are your friends? Who's your family? What life experience do you have? A lot of people that get deferred from the application process are because of lack of life experience. A lot of people applying at
right.
18, 19 years old, but they really haven't done much with their life. But I think me being in cadets kind of helped with the the experience of being able to follow an order
Yeah,
or
exactly.
drill was a big one
Yes,
too. I
do
was
your boots
a rock
and
star
drill.
at that.
Yeah,
Keep your uniform clean,
yeah.
and just that desire to do good.
And that ethic of self-discipline that comes with it, you know. I think
Yes.
that's a routine
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
a lot of young people will tell you later on they benefit from. And of course, the old saw was if you want to straighten out a kid, get them into the force, and that'll make a man of them or straighten them out. Didn't always work, of course. But the idea that there were life skills in service, but also life skill as service was important too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we look at that, and as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, how many other young people in their life would benefit from the presence of constables, officers? I mean, I know the Air Cadets, where my daughter was involved, there was always someone there. One of the attachment commanders was Brandy Boychuk, and we had the Simons family as advisors and teachers. There was a sense that in terms of the background and the backbone of many of the cadet leaders in this town had police roots or police experience. And they became a sense, well, that means that the leadership there is responsible, solid, resourceful, and has connections too, you know, for the kids. Did you feel that there were other people who were not only familiarized, but had any barriers lowered or resistance to the presence of police? Did it help them familiarize in a friendly way in your different work?
I know when I was the recruiting officer, I would go to all the different ethnic groups in town. And I think in some ways, meeting with them, I met with the Eamon, I believe that's how you pronounce it, talked to him, and kind of got some inroads into the Muslim community that way. I think, again, we're breaking down that maybe the preconceived notion that some people may have, whether they're new to Canada or first or second generation. You know, their grandparents or their parents might have horror stories.
Oh,
and,
yeah, I was thinking.
a young person saying, "Hey, I want to become a Canadian police officer," and they're like, "Oh, no, you can't do that."
That's right.
So I think over the years, and a lot of the officers did it, just breaking down that barrier. We've had lots of different officers from various different ethnic backgrounds who would go into that community and help break that down. And,
Yeah, I remember when we had refugees from Kosovo come to Grande Prairie, and they went right to the Air Cadets with their boys to get them in there, because their plan was they were going to, of course, go through cadets, join the forces to be peacekeepers in the future. And at first you think, yeah, because you're hoping to go back. But on the other hand, these guys all graduated from the program and became businessmen, engineers. They didn't all become military members, but there was a sense that this was a creditable way to embed yourself in the community.
Yeah.
And of course, they would meet leaders like you. What was it like to do cadets at Fort Mac?
I mean, the structure for cadets is always there. It was a bit of a different venue and stuff. They were based out of the Legion up there.
Yeah, okay.
And they just kind of had an upper floor and an office, and that was about it. They didn't really have a drill square or anything like that.
Oh, really? Okay.
So you got to see a little bit of a different side of it. But the officers were great up there. The cadets were great. They were fewer in number than here.
Okay.
But I think volunteering with them, you kind of saw when I first showed up. It was the first night I showed up. I was in uniform, and you saw everybody's kind of faces looking at me like, "Why is he here?" And then as time went on, they kind of all just let down their guard a little bit, started joking with me, and I'm joking back with them.
Okay.
And I mean that happens all the time anyway, not just with the youth, because you show up somewhere and people kind of have their guard up when they're talking to you, but when you start cracking a few jokes, they kind of, you see that relief. But
So it helps keep you loose to be working with young people.
absolutely,
too.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
I really enjoyed it, and to my knowledge, a couple of those cadets actually had applications in for the RCMP by the time I had left, so it's kind of a,
legacy continues.
yeah,
Well,
it's
that's
legacy
it.
continues. It starts with Scott.
Well, there you go. You see, we got. I won't ask Scott how you did as a cadet, and I won't ask you how he
he was a
did
rock
as an
star.
officer.
He
but-
was a rock star.
Oh, there you go.
I was pretty proud of him.
Right. I mean,
So-
this legacy is important because exactly that, and there'll be someday perhaps somebody who will know you will be looking at a career in the force as well.
I had a New Westminster police officer who was an officer when I was a cadet. And that kind of,
wow.
policing's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So
What do you know?
it wasn't a Mountie, but, he was New Westminster police. We'll forgive that.
Well, we're coming to a transition now that's going to be very interesting because as the mounted police withdraw from Grande Prairie and the city force moves into position, because we're still in transition now, I hope that a program like this can remind people that the contribution that the RCMP has made to Grande Prairie over the years is often measured in ways that don't get in the paper and don't involve enforcement. What about all those stolen bikes in Nighthawk? I heard something about that at one point.
That was another kind of a crime prevention program we came up with where bike theft is always an issue in anywhere, any city. And it really upset a lot of parents that, their youth would go out and raise all this money, buy this nice bike, and then it gets stolen. So we kind of came up with this program. And we didn't invent it. We just kind of modified it where you mark a bike. So the one constant is your driver's license.
Right.
It's your license, that number belongs to you forever. So we were engraving that on people's bikes, and then we developed this sticker, which I kind of snuck by the superintendent. I don't think he really understood it until he saw it, but it was a skull and crossbones, and it said, back off, marked by RCMP, and then GP crime prevention underneath it. So we would mark the bikes and then put the stickers on. And then Jonathan out at Nighthawk was like, hey, do you want to come out here and do that? So I showed up one Saturday and I biked out there myself, but not in uniform, so no one knew who I was.
Right.
All of a sudden, I show up with one of the crime prevention vehicles, and I've got an engraver and a workstation, and people are like looking, and then all of a sudden, there's a lineup of people who want their bikes done, and then it was a cool thing to get that sticker. Another one of Karen's tremendous programs, and I don't know. I thought I was getting like carpal tunnel from using an engraver so much.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this is the interesting thing. I find in Grande Prairie that many members of the force are involved in things and they have a sizzle to what they do. A skull and crossbones sticker. Someone who says, how is that going to affect on the image of the force is going to kill it. But someone who says, that's an idea, let's be a little sideways off the wall.
Because no one wanted to put like the old crime prevention, that horrible sticker that was out in the 70s. No one would put that on a $10,000 mountain bike.
Yeah.
But it's something kind of cool. I've got them on my bikes still.
Yeah.
So-
So you see, you're not out of date. When I think of my image of the mounted police in the 60s, it was the guy that always came to the parties with the short haircut. Stands right out,
Yeah.
And obviously didn't fit in, awkward, here's the narc at the party, right? And that attitude was very negative because we never had policemen involved in our high school or involved in our community as anything but enforcement. Now, if I'd grown up in Grande Prairie, and it had people that I'd known who maybe had coached my hockey team or whatever, that kind of benefit, which just wasn't there in the 60s and barely beginning in the 70s, but it's already establishing in the 80s and 90s here a relationship that really matters in communication. And I hope that we continue to see something like that in the community as the years go by. Do you have a list of competencies yet?
Oh,
Well,
he's
you-
got lots.
Quite a few. Like I did promote a little while ago, so I had to write them out myself.
Okay, right,
But
right.
yeah, it's it's a tough thing to think about when you're put on the spot, but I had my own list of volunteer opportunities,
Yeah,
and
okay,
certain in those volunteer opportunities, certain events that occurred. In particular, I'm thinking search and rescue that definitely helped me write those competencies that were stellar examples.
Well, when a little kid goes lost in the woods, which happened up here all the time in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, there was always the RCMP either coordinating or involved in the search, right?
Yeah.
And how many times did some little kid lost in the forest get found by a Mountie, as we used to say? And it was almost expected that they would know what to do and how to do it. But now you see it's not so much that, because we have the search and rescue and we have other groups that can go into the forest. But the question becomes now on the day-to-day on the streets and on the side roads and in the little villages, the kind of people that you need who look after people. You're finding lost kids in a different way now.
Yeah.
Through some of the agencies you're involved in and the communities you're in, you know. And that too is part of the rescue process, but done in a way that's not top-down, patronizing, or power-driven.
Yeah.
But is service-driven? Is that a better way to put it?
Yeah, and I think that's what makes the RCMP unique in Canada is we police small towns. I mean, I've been in small towns where there's 4 officers, and you don't want to just go to work and then go sit in your home waiting for your next shift. You do get involved. So I remember like being Pincher Creek was my first detachment.
Oh, yeah. Right.
I ski. There's a ski hill. So like I think my second day on work, I drove out to visit the ski hill and check it out.
Check it out.
And then got out of the car and some guy was like, "Hey, how are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm your new Mountie." And I ended up being part of their ski patrol that year. I think my first week I was driving down this, my corporal said, "Take the car, go drive around, go learn the area. If anything happens, I'll call you." Well, I can remember driving down a road and this herd of cattle was coming towards me. I'm like, "Oh no, what do I do?" So I drove the car in the ditch and all these cows went by and there's hundreds of them. And these guys on horseback like come up and look, they're sitting there on their horses. Like, "Why are you in the ditch?" I said, "Well, the cows will go around you, son. Like, where are you from?"
Right.
So I'm your new Mountie from Vancouver. Oh,
okay.
and they're like, "Well, we got talking, and the next thing you know, I was invited to. They were pulling all the cows out of the pastures.
Yes.
The common.
Yeah.
I forget what they call them, the common herd pasture or something.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, oh, here's my number. My wife's going to call you. We're doing this thing next weekend. We want you to come to it. Well, then it's the whole branding and then the prairie oyster thing.
Yes, exactly.
There's no way on earth I was eating prairie oysters, but it's just, and in a small town, in the small towns, you have to get involved. Otherwise, you're just going to become a hermit.
Yeah.
So it forces you to get involved in your community. Like, when I was in Spirit River, we had one of our members was a curling nut. He got involved in the curling association.
Right.
You just find your niche in your small town, and that just opens up the doors. And then next thing you know, you're invited to stuff, and then you're asked to help with stuff. Or, like River had the Alberta Games, summer games. So, okay, Scott, you mountain bike. Okay, you're in charge of the mountain biking race, and
Way to go.
so it's just part of being a Mountie in a small town. And when you're in Edmonton, you can hide.
Yeah, true. A large attachment.
You can go to work and change and hide after that, and no one knows who you are. A small town of 2,000 or 3,000 people, everybody knows who you are. Everybody knows where you live. You're forced to embed yourself into that
Very
community.
good answer. Well, we're coming towards the end of our time, but I want to talk about a couple things. One about anti-bullying. Are you involved in any of that, or have been?
There's always the RCMP initiative to have, obviously, Anti-Bullying Day, and they kind of do a preamble to it as well. RCMP's really got on board with Pink Shirt Day.
Right.
So you'll see the officers who normally wear the white shirts, they take one of them and dye it pink, and they'll wear that. And
right.
It's just a uniform shirt, pink. And,
Yeah, right.
but then on that same day, we're permitted to wear a pink shirt under our uniform, so you just see this much of it. But
Right. Right.
it's something that's talked about in schools. So when our community policing unit is at full strength. They go around to the schools and do those presentations. Right now, the individual officers that are working on the road on the watch, they're all assigned to school right now, and
Okay,
they have that expectation of going to the schools, and the schools will ask for that presentation, and definitely
Right.
they hand it out. So
Now, I got to ask you about Orange Shirt Days. Are the RCMP welcomed? Is it a normal environment now, or is there still a lot of the popular image? You know, I talk to students, senior students, right, and some leaders who sort of are allergic to the RCMP because of the school and the seizures and stuff. Do you find, however, that now that some of the expectations, the animosity are gone? Is there any poison left, or has it been drawn now?
obviously, there's some people that are going to issue a lot of blame, and
Yeah.
rightfully so, right? There was mistakes made,
Yeah.
but I personally haven't had any of that animosity directed towards me. I worked on a reserve for a few years. There's 4 reserves around Fort
Yeah,
McMurray
right.
that I was on each of them, and
Right.
everyone was, for the most part, friendly, unless I was dealing with them in a response kind of way. But most of them were pretty friendly, open to conversation. Youth and stuff like that, I don't tend to see that kind of blame coming from them, but it seems to be pretty open discussion if it does come up.
Yeah,
And it's not you, it's,
right.
yeah.
Great.
I think it's history. I mean,
In
Brad
the
wasn't
past,
even born when that happened.
Yeah, in the past, yeah.
I worked on a reserve down south before the whole residential school became widely known and the issues behind that. I had a native advisor who I thought was one of the most amazing people I've ever met, Morris. I met phenomenal people. And again, like Brad, 90% of the people were incredibly wonderful, warm, welcoming, just wonderful human beings. The other 10% you dealt with in an enforcement role. And of course, if you're arresting someone, they don't like you at that moment.
No,
Yep.
no.
Um,
See, it's
but-
interesting, the number of Indigenous members from Grand Prairie who have joined the force over the years. You know, I knew the Miller girls well.
Yeah,
And
they were my summer
their
students.
family, exactly, and these are people, and others maybe who are auxiliary at one time or another. And we did have in this town, I guess, a fairly substantial auxiliary force and program.
We did for a long time.
Yeah.
And again, you're drawing different aspects of the community. And I know from when I did recruiting, that was one of the things that I thought was one of the most amazing things of the RCMP is their goal is to represent Canada. So if 46% of the population is female, they are trying to reach 46% of the
Okay.
membership.
Right.
We recruited from everywhere, LGBTQ, Aboriginal, immigrant, everyone and anyone who, as long as you meet the standard, was offered an opportunity to join the force. And it's still like that. We have every different aspect of the community, of Canada's culture in that building down the street.
Yeah, I went to public school with one of the first female constables to be recruited in the early 70s. And I will remember the kind of person she was and how natural it seemed to be for her to move into the force. I've often wondered how she did, but it's been 40 years, 45 years since I knew her. But for her to move into that at that time was pretty radical. To come in that early in the program.
But
Well-
Canada evolves and, the RCMP evolves and, the Canadian Forces is doing the same. We have women combat pilots now.
Yeah, that's right.
And rightly so.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely.
So as we wrap it up here, a couple things. It's pretty clear that your lives involve patrolling, but at the same time, your lives have also been involved in community integration. You are part of the community, and you don't hide. Maybe you can't here, but on the other hand, you don't try either. You're getting involved, and I suspect that in 5 more years, I could put you in that chair and somebody in that chair, and we could have a similar, even though the culture's changed a bit, we could probably have a similar discussion,
Probably.
although perhaps the next constable will be wearing a turban, I used to visit with the military police at Camp Borden at the school there, and the uniforms began to evolve as the years evolved until the last time I was there, they were training guys in turbans, right? Military issue.
And those exist in the RCMP as well.
Exactly,
We have,
yes.
We have several Sikh
Yeah.
members, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, the first one to wear a turban is just retired
Dylan,
after all these years. Yeah,
he went through training just a few years before I did, but I had 2 Sikh members in my troop.
amazing, yeah. Well,
And lots of women in my troop.
exactly, yes. In fact, did you say your troop was on, when women were the majority?
Yeah,
Yep.
first troop in Canadian history to have more female members than
Yep.
male members.
Right. So in the transition years, the question is, will the transitioning ever stop? You know, will there be a time when everyone says, okay, we got balance, we're done? Or will, in fact, there'll be constant, as Canada moves along, the police will move along too? You know?
I think we are. I mean, Brad's has a beard.
That's right.
That was unheard of when I was a member.
That's because I was a lot younger then.
That's right.
Oh, there you go, yeah.
But, tattoos. Members now have tattoos. Members can dye their hair. I mean, what I went through was highly regimented.
Yeah.
They're
That's
all
right.
cookie cutter.
Paramilitary.
It's very paramilitary. But,
Right.
Yeah.
Canada's evolving and our culture's evolving, and I'm proud to think that the RCMP, it might be a little slow. I mean, it's a huge organization and it takes change, time to change, but it is changing. I mean, Brad gets to wear a beard now.
Yep.
We have lots of members that have tattoos. We have gay members. We have every minority group, I think,
Yeah,
is in
so
that
some of the
building.
language skills are improved that way with the diversity as well.
Well, that's huge because I think
Sounds like the UN in there some days.
On my watch alone, I think we have probably 6 languages spoken,
Yeah, good.
and that's among 8 people. It's pretty incredible that in that small of a group you can have that much of a diverse
Yeah.
cultural background and language background and stuff like that. So
And experience.
and experience, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Like one of the guys in the detachments from Yugoslavia, or talking to him, the horror story his family went through to get out of that area, like during the war and then
Yeah, the Balkans.
the Balkans
The dark
wars.
years,
And
yeah.
I mean, he talks about seeing Canadian peacekeepers and how their family, because of just seeing our peacekeepers, wanted to come to Canada. And now he's so proud to be a Mountie. He's got the coolest name.
Yeah.
Well, he's Serbian.
Serbian.
It
He's
was Serbian,
yeah.
yeah. Wow.
And his brother's a Mountie as well.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, thank you both for being here and doing this. I hope as time goes by, people will find this broadcast and use it to remind people and to commemorate the contribution to building Grande Prairie as a safe community.
Yeah.
That's been contributed by the mounted police. And it wasn't without a price. I want to just finish, because we're taping this during the week of Remembrance. We actually lost 3 constables over the years here. In 1920, Staff Sergeant George Visay was hit by lightning near Spirit River on patrol and was killed. Later on in 1967, Corporal Donald Harvey was shot and killed in Grande Prairie. And in 1985, Constable Brent Vekved lost his life as well. So that with this service comes a risk, and freedom, safety, security has a price. And so with that in mind, I want to thank you again for literally offering yourselves to serve the community. And like we often tell our kids, we have to treat you with respect because you run towards danger, not away from it. So thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for trying to keep our history alive.
Yeah.
You don't want to be forgotten after all, at least not in this camp. So thank you very much. Thank you for watching. And we have one more broadcast in our series lined up, which will probably be on the history of hockey. How more Canadian can you get? But we'll keep you posted on that. Thank you very much for being with us. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to the PCHS podcast. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you are notified when we release new episodes. To learn more about the Peace Country Historical Society, visit our website, pc-hs.ca.